Hello everybody, Scott Sword here, and welcome back to another Fury of Dracula related video, and more specifically, Fury of Dracula 5th edition. I put out a video recently discussing my thoughts, or my initial thoughts on the announcement of the Fury of Dracula 5th edition, in response to an article that was posted about it about 3 weeks beforehand. But I wanted to do a little quick follow-up because there was something from the article that I had missed, and we have been discussing it within the Fury of Dracula Digital Edition Discord communities, links for which I will leave down below in the comments, in a pinned comment. Please come over and check out those two different servers. We've got the Nomad Games server where we can chat to the devs of the Digital Edition, as well as finding people to play friendly games, quote unquote, of Fury of Dracula. And we've also got a dedicated community server only for Fury of Dracula. That's where we do a lot of the tournament organization over there, but also we post lots of memes, and also we've had a lot of conversation about the 5th edition and also just other changes about the game and strategy in general. So please feel free to come and check those out if you're interested. So one thing that I missed, and I had it, maybe I didn't have it written down in my notes, but it was something I was aware of, but I forgot to mention it during that video I posted a few days ago, was that there was a little interesting tidbit hidden in the article, which was about, there's a little quote that said that there were going to be 3 new vampires in the encounter deck. Now when it says new vampires, it doesn't mean that they're brand new, like newly designed, as far as we're aware. It's just the name of the encounter card. New vampires, but it says there are 3. And we thought that maybe this could have been a mistake or a misprint, but I was going to give the writer of the article due diligence, and that it was not a mistake. I'll also link the article in the comments, by the way, if you want to check that out. But then, so that was something that was mentioned in the Discord, and I was going to mention it in the video, and I completely forgot. But there was something that we'd all missed, which was, it also says inside the same sentence that the encounter deck contains 20 cards. Now, anybody who's familiar, at least with the 4th edition of Fury of Dracula, there are actually 28 cards in the encounter deck, and I've listed them all here. So clearly, there's been some sort of reworking of the encounter deck. Not only has the number of cards decreased from 28 to 20, but now we've got 3 new vampires instead of 2. So I want to discuss this a little bit. There's a little bit of a speculative video. Let's see if we can try and deduce what the new encounter deck is, and we can talk about the ramifications of such things. So I've gone through. I'll also I'll leave some links in the comment section as well, which I have links to certain places which I've found bits of information which I've been able to try and deduce more or less what the new encounter deck is. So let's go over everything in turn. So we know there are 3 new vampires. So let's just get this new vampire moved across into 5th edition, and then I have to change this number to 3, not 2. So that basically means that out of the remaining encounters, we're going to have to basically lose 9 of them, if that makes sense. So aristocratic vampires, we don't have any information about them at the moment. We'll come back to that later, but I think these are going to be removed. But anyway, reckless vampires are definitely in the game because I think I've seen the encounter card for them, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm more than sure they're in. Well, I've got a piece of paper next to me with reckless with a tick next to it. So the reckless vampires are there, and there are 3 in the 4th edition deck. I assume that number's not going to change. So let's just operate under that assumption for now. I think aristocratic vampires are going to be removed. So the reason why is in the 4th edition deck, out of the 28 cards, 8 of them are vampires. So that's just under 30% of the cards are vampires. If we're going for a 20 card deck in 5th edition, and if there are 6 vampires, then that's pretty much 30%. So we're on the same ratio in terms of the number of vampires out of all the encounters. So I'm going to just make an assumption here that aristocratic vampires are no more. So whether you agree, whether you agree that's a good idea or not, that's something we can discuss in the comments. But I think that's what's going to happen. Right, the next 4 I've got on the list for the 4th edition: rats, spy, saboteur, and wolves. All of these are definitely in 5th edition. The reason why is because we know that dogs are in the game, and the dog's card is written exactly the same way as 4th edition, as it cancels all of these encounter cards if it's an ambush or a search. So we can just delete them and move them into the 5th edition deck. Now, I'm making the assumption here that the numbers are not going to change, that there are still going to be 2 rats, or 2 of each. It is possible that maybe they've been reduced, but the problem is if they do that, then you're nerfing dogs. And dogs is already a card that, at least in our digital edition meta, dogs are not very strong anyway. So why would you nerf an item that is already considered pretty weak? That would be insanity, in my opinion. If I was changing the game, I would personally, if you were going to mess around with the encounter deck a little bit, I would maybe remove rats or maybe reduce the number of saboteur wolves or something of that nature, but then you can maybe rework dogs to give them a slightly different effect. But never mind, that's a story for a different video. But anyway, I also found a photograph of all of the tokens and little pieces that are inside the game, and there are enough tokens for 2 bats and 2 unnatural fog encounters, so that means that's the same as the 4th edition, so we can move them across. And that also means then in the quick play variant, which says that 2 copies of unnatural fog have to be removed when you're doing the quick play variant, that means that's both of the unnatural fog encounters. We had a speculative comment in the Discord. Somebody who's a big Dracula fan said, "Oh, maybe that means there are more than 2 fogs." But no, it looks like there's only 2 encounters, because there are 4 tokens for fog in total, because you can have a maximum of 2 per encounter card. So that's okay for now. So if I count correctly, let's see if I can get this right. 6, 8, 10, 18, right? So we've only got 4 things left, and I have seen that Hoax is also in the game as well. So we're going to move Hoax over, especially since Hoax is the one way that Dracula, it's not guaranteed to get encounter cards, but if you don't Night Supply, then Dracula will never get encounter cards, whereas Hoax is the one way that Dracula can obtain an encounter card, an event card, because if you don't know, in the digital edition meta that has developed, hunters basically never Night Supply, unless there's Mystic Research, or if they're really desperate for event cards. But because they're normally day supplying during the first week and so on, there's never any reason to Night Supply under normal circumstances. So because of that, the only way that Dracula can obtain an event card is through Hoax. So removing this would be very controversial in the first place, but also I've got it here next to me with a tick, so there is definitely proof of Hoax existing. So that means then, if we look at the other 3 cards which are left, Desecrated Soil, Zagani Mob, and Zagani Bodyguards, if we remove them, then that will give us the 9 cards in total which are discarded from the encounter deck, and we've now got 20 in the 5th edition deck. So there you go. So if I'm not mistaken, this is the composition of the 5th edition encounter deck. It's possible, as I said before, that there could be a situation where you've got maybe only 1 rats and 1 saboteur and 1 wolves and 1 spy or something, and then you put in 1 copy of these, the ones which have been removed. But I don't think that's the case, because I don't think you would nerf dogs. And then also it'd be really weird that you got some cards that only have 1 copy, especially a card like rats, which is so weak. So this seems to make sense to me. So the removal of Desecrated Soil, I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, obviously, if you're... So let's talk about the card itself. The ambush or search effect of Desecrated Soil is that Dracula can obtain 3 additional encounter cards into his hand and then discard up to 3. So it's a way for Dracula to cycle through his encounter deck. Now, obviously, if you're making the encounter deck thinner, then you don't maybe need a card that allows you to cycle through your encounter deck. And then also then you add layers on top of that, because otherwise you'll just make it more and more and more likely that you're going to obtain things like Unnatural Fog and Bats, which are really difficult encounters for hunters to deal with under normal circumstances. So I understand that removing Desecrated Soil in terms of the ambush search effect of the card, but the mature effect of Desecrated Soil is that Dracula gets health back. And if that's been removed, unless there is something else that has been added into the game that allows Dracula to get health back, then the only way he can do it now is through combat. or feeding or Castle Dracula. Now, some of you might be sitting there going, well, that's fine. But the thing is, feeding is the most reliable way of Dracula getting health back. But the problem is, if Dracula's feeding, that means he is giving up an entire turn of placing an encounter and a city location. And if you're talking about encounter cycling, right, getting through your encounter deck as fast as possible, then feeding, you're stopping that from happening. Again, in this case, because the deck is thinner, then maybe you don't really care about that, and you think, right, I'm going to feed anyway because I've got lots of strong encounters in my hand. I'm not worried about having to try and cycle out bad stuff. Going to Castle Dracula is just, it basically never happens. It will only happen if Dracula takes a huge amount of damage. Or it doesn't even have to be a huge amount of damage. Well, yes, okay. He takes a huge amount of damage, and the only way that Dracula thinks that he can survive long enough is to go to Castle Dracula, get health back, and then be on his way again. But the problem is, because when you go into Castle Dracula, it's flagged on the trail immediately by the backing of the card, which I assume has not changed for 5th edition, that Dracula's gone to Castle Dracula. Then the hunters know it, right? Maybe they've changed it that the backing of the card of Castle Dracula is the same as all the other city cards, but then you would see Dracula gaining health back, and that would then be a tip to the hunters. Oh, he's gone to Castle Dracula anyway. Why is he suddenly, healing for 5 damage or whatever? So, yeah, the issue is, as soon as you flag that you're in Castle Dracula, then the hunters can do some really nasty stuff. They can surround you, especially if you've had to wolf form into Castle Dracula, then you can't wolf form back out. Consecrated Ground in Bucharest then blocks that exit, and the hunters can surround you when you leave. So going to Castle Dracula is really, really tricky to do. The only time I've seen it being done really successfully is either if the hunters are all the way on the other side of the board, but that doesn't normally happen, or if you have a situation where you've got a combat in the east, Dracula is able to do quite a lot of damage to the hunters. Maybe he takes a lot of damage back, but he's able to break the hunter's staff. Maybe they burn a heavenly host or something. So suddenly they have no items to do anything to Dracula. Dracula's able to escape his bat into Castle Dracula or nearby, and then he's able to get back out of Castle Dracula before the hunters are even really equipped well enough to be able to take him on again. And all the damage they did to him is basically wasted. So, as I said, Castle Dracula is not a feature of the game or something in the game that is really noteworthy. It's not often that Castle Dracula is used. If Castle Dracula has been reworked in some way, that maybe if Dracula goes to Castle Dracula, he obtains an event card from the discard pile or something like that, almost like a hoax mature, then maybe it might see more play. But otherwise, Castle Dracula's not really used. And then in combat, Dracula healing in combat is actually more difficult than it sounds. At least in our meta, we really prioritize things like knives, for example. So Dracula can't feed off fangs very much. It's very difficult for Dracula to land a fangs well. If you've got Sister Agatha in play, then basically that nullifies any healing that Dracula can do in combat. So I feel the healing from Desecrated Soil is still something that is needed in the game. That's how I feel about it. So unless there's been some sort of rework where maybe feed gives you more health, or there is more incentive for Dracula to go to Castle Dracula, but then making sure he doesn't get trapped there, then I'm kind of concerned about the lack of healing that Dracula can obtain, right? And also the other reason is, if you're playing efficiently as hunters, you never want to try and get into a situation where you only have a 1v1 with Dracula and he's able to bully the hunter and feed off them and things. You want to try and just do one fight with Dracula where you get 3 hunters on him, so he can't target all the hunters, and then you can kill him in one combat, basically. So, but I'm still a little bit concerned about the lack of healing. Actually, there was a game from a tournament played last night, actually, where Dracula had a very poor encounter hand at the beginning, but what the Dracula player did was play Desecrated Soul first, put a rumor token on it, so the hunters beelined onto that location, tried to search it. It was a Desecrated Soil, so got that encounter cycling going earlier and hopefully got some good stuff, but also then because the hunter rushed onto it and the heavenly hosts weren't available, Dracula had gone to sea and done a wolf form, so was able to get all that health back without having to feed. So there are ways that Desecrated Soul can be useful. It's not a top tier event or top tier encounter rather, by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a bit sort of concerned about the lack of healing that Dracula can have, unless there's been a rework somewhere else. So again, I'll save judgment once I see everything, but that's just something to sort of to keep in mind. The aristocratic vampire, as I said, you've now got this different. You got the same balance in terms of the number of vampires in the deck as a percentage of the whole deck. But you've now got a situation where all the vampires which are in this encounter deck, I assume, if they work the same way as in 4th edition, these are fighting vampires. Unless they've transferred the ability of the aristocratic vampire to new vampire, so you can't fight with it. But that would just make the deck worse, in my opinion. You really need, if you're going to do something like this, you want all of these vampires to be able to fight, and then it would be a buff to Dracula, because now you've got more fighting vampires available. If the item deck is the same composition, then you've only got 4 stakes, so you've got 6 fighting vampires, but only 4 stakes. So that means during the course of the game, if the hunters always keep stakes, then unless they're able to cycle through the item deck really quickly, they're going to have to engage in combat to kill, not just as an ambush, but they're going to have to engage in combat to kill at least 2 fighting vampires. Again, it depends on how quickly they can cycle the item deck, how quickly Dracula can cycle the item deck. A lot of hunters don't want to carry stakes because they want to carry knives and heavenly hosts and all these sort of things for other reasons, and fast horses. So, this might mix up the meta a little bit. In fast horses are still a thing, by the way. That's been confirmed as well. So if fast horse meta is going to work the same way, then the hunters are even going to be more stretched in terms of what items they should hold on to, which I think is a good thing, right? If you make it, there's more jeopardy for hunters for not carrying stakes. They prioritize stakes to kill vampires, but then they're not as strong in terms of combat strength to deal with Dracula. I think that's a cool decision point, that different hunter players will have different strategies of how they approach that. And also depends on just how the items fall. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You obtain all the stakes early, so you just end up sticking with them or whatever. Or if all the stakes are stuck at the bottom of the deck, then so be it. So this definitely makes Dracula's Trail a lot more nasty if you're going to see fighting vampires occurring more often. If new vampires have the ability of aristocratic vampire that they can't fight, and all the hunter has to do is delay themselves in order to get rid of it, which kind of the name suggests they're a new vampire that haven't fully matured or anything, so they're not going to fight you, then sure, hunter getting delayed is very useful. That's something that we talked about in the community, right? The ability of aristocratic vampire is kind of cool, because if you're delaying hunters, well, then they can't do anything, and normally they search at night. So then they're missing day actions, or if they wait until the following day to search it, they've lost the day action anyway. So, just delaying hunters is a good thing. You can do nasty tricks where you put the rumor token on the aristocratic, so they burn a stake in order to deal with it, so they've lost a stake, and then there might be a fighting vampire directly after it. And sure, you're maybe not going to get as many points as you would from a rumored aristocratic, but you might be able to bait the hunter into a night fight, you might be able to kill them, or break their stuff or whatever, and then they're more delayed in the sense of they're going to have to heal up more and equip more, and that then gives Dracula more time to do whatever he wants. So it's tricky until, I think Reckless Vampire will act the same way as it does in 4th edition. I'll be really disappointed if it doesn't. This is something that we've spoken about on videos before. And it was something that Roscoe, my collaborator on the channel, especially in the early days, said that it's a really interestingly designed set of items and mechanics and things. That the Reckless Vampire has 4 health, Heavenly Host can do 4 damage in one go, so those two things sort of counteract each other, but the thing that counters Heavenly Host is Fangs, and Reckless Vampire is encouraged to Fang because you can get additional influence if it's ambush. So it's just a really cool mechanic. You don't know, the two fighting against each other. So we'll have to see. It'll be interesting to see if the health values have changed on these or not. I'm not too sure. The new Vampire, obviously, in 4th edition, it has more health than the Reckless, but you're able to team up on it. So 2 hunters can go and fight it if they're in the same space, rather than Reckless, it was always 1v1s. So, if you don't have stakes, of course. So, it'll be interesting to see if that's changed. I assume not, but who knows? I haven't seen the new Vampire card. I've seen the edge of the Reckless cards. I could kind of work out what the text says, and it looks very similar. But new Vampire, I don't know. We'll have to see. So that's concerning the vampires. So the other two, Sagani Mob and Sagani Bodyguards. So from a gameplay perspective, I'm really surprised that these are the ones that got the chop. They are sort of the middling cards. They're better than rats. Mob can do more damage than rats because normally hunters don't discard items unless they're really desperate. Bodyguards, the mature effect of bodyguards is kind of interesting. Sometimes when Dracula doesn't have a hoax in his starting hand but has a bodyguard, he might place bodyguards and then a vampire, because a bodyguard's mature is kind of cool, right? You can use it in a certain combat against a hunter, but when you want, so it's quite elective. If you realize a hunter's running around with no weapon, you can target them, do double damage, and all this sort of thing. So I think the mature effect of bodyguards is kind of neat. Is also revealing weapons, which is useful. I know wolves and rats do the same. But bodyguards is a guaranteed 2 damage, whereas wolves is not guaranteed damage because the hunters could block all of that damage. Rats is actually better than wolves in that respect because, rats does guarantee the damage, then you reveal a weapon to get rid of it. Maybe things like wolves and rats have been altered a bit, that they remain on the trail or something. I doubt it, but I still think, Saboteur is kind of one of these divisive encounter cards. It's not exceedingly strong, obviously gives you no combat ability, but it allows the hunters to be delayed, which is, again, quite potent. If you get it in the right situation, you can block renewed vigors with it, which is kind of neat. It requires a lot of careful placement and you need to get the timing right, but you can potentially block renewed vigors with it a little bit. Spy is... I was really worried that Spy was going to be removed, because Spy is the only way really that Dracula can mess with the ticket pool. Anyone doesn't know, in the meta that we use in digital edition with fast horses, the hunters have to hold on to the bad train tickets, the ones that don't move you very far. But that means that when they use fast horses, they're always moving 2 spaces at a time. So the only way that Dracula can influence that is either he kills a hunter, because then or defeats a hunter, I should say, because then the tickets are discarded, or is able to hit with Spy, and then the hunter has the choice between removing their weapon to discard Spy, or they got dogs, but they normally don't carry dogs, or they have to show everything and throw away the train tickets. Hopefully that hasn't changed. Obviously, what you can do is really neat, because you've got 2 copies of Spy. You can put Spy back to back on the trail, especially on small city locations, and often for efficiency, the same hunter will be checking multiple spaces on the trail. So they get hit by one Spy, they discard the weapon, then they go on to the next Spy. As long as they don't have a second weapon, which they normally don't unless it's John Seward, they have to discard the train tickets, and then Jacqueline knows, okay, maybe I might have got a white one back into the pool, and that's going to ruin things a little bit. So Spies I wouldn't want to get rid of. Rats and Saboteur maybe wolves are the weakest 3. So I'm surprised that Sagani Mob and Sagani Bodyguards got the chop before those. But then you'd have to rework dogs and blah 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 blah. One thing we were talking about in the community, this is purely speculative. I don't, unless somebody from Asbro or Avalon Hill or anybody involved in the project can confirm this one way or the other. One theory we've come up with is maybe that these 2 were removed from the game because of the word Sagani. The fact that it's somewhat of a slur word, basically meaning gypsy, and based upon the time period that the Dracula book was written, maybe it was a word that was more acceptable. I'm saying during that time period. I'm not an expert on the history, so if anybody can confirm it one way or the other. I did find a really good article actually, which spoke in quite a bit of detail about the words Sagani and Gypsy, and then also Romani as well. So it's considered, especially nowadays, somewhat of a slur word. So even though the board game is based upon a piece of literature that was written obviously in a completely different time period, and standards would have been different back then, maybe for a modern release of the game they don't like this word. I don't know. Again, people who are more familiar with Fury of Dracula history and things, is this something that has caused controversy in the past or not? If that is the case, that they don't like the word Sagani because it's a slur word and things, okay, I can accept that. That's if that's a decision that they've made, that's I don't have a problem with it. I just the way that I would approach it would be, if you're worried about the word Sagani, well then why can't you just name them this? Just remove the word Sagani and just call them mob and bodyguards. Within our digital edition community, we already call them mob and bodyguards. We never say the word Sagani unless we're talking in a very formal context. If I'm talking, about a video, for example, where I'm talking about the encounter cards, I will call them by the official name. But when we're talking in commentary and on the Discord and stuff, we always just say mob bodyguards. We never say the word Sagani anyway. And then you've got, you know, human-based encounters already, like Spy and Saboteur. They don't have the word Sagani in front of them. So, you don't need the word Sagani in front of mob or bodyguards necessarily to make the card relevant. So, or not so. I don't know if maybe it was a consideration, but maybe there was maybe the feeling was that they didn't like the effects of mob and bodyguard, so they just removed them anyway. I don't know. As I said, I'm purely speculating. I don't know why. I don't know what the decision making was exactly for removing these four. I'm just trying to speculate what it could be, and thinking about then what impact that has on the game. That's all. So, this is what I think has happened. But once we see the encounter deck in full, again, I'll throw out, I'll throw a request. If anybody's going to Gen Con or anybody has any inside information, then feel free to get in touch with me, and I can, we can talk about it more down the line. But I believe this is the encounter deck for 5th edition. So the fact the deck's been trimmed, you're going to see assuming these are fighting vampires, you're going to see fighting vampires more often. That's not a bad thing for the game. It'll make the game more difficult for beginner hunters, but thinking about it from the perspective of highly skilled hunters against highly skilled Dracula players, and there is a disparity there in terms of hunters have the advantage at that skill level, then having more fighting vampires is going to make it more difficult for the hunters. Same, it means that it's more likely that Dracula will have Hoax in his starting hand. That makes it more difficult for the hunters because, yes, they're going to keep the meta of supplying and everything, but then you're putting lots of Dracula cards into the event deck through all the day supplies, and if a Hoax matures, then it's more likely that Dracula has the Hoax in the starting hand, and you'll see more Dracula events. You'll get unnatural fogs, cycling through the deck more often, so Dracula can now do more things with unnatural fog instead of using it purely as a defensive card for his current location. If he's going to get jumped on, he can now use it as part of the trail, right? I've done it before in certain games where I've put down a fog first in some sort of narrow location like southern Italy, for example. I'll put a natural fog in Rome, and then I'll put a Hoax in Naples and a vampire in Bari or something. The fog matures first, or a hunter comes to deal with it, and the fog hits them, and then suddenly you've got a situation where they cannot deal with the next one or two encounters after that, and then I'm guaranteed my Hoax mature, I'm guaranteed my vampire mature. You can put it as a hide card, right? There's lots of things you could do with it now, which it would make the game a lot more difficult. It would make Forewarned even more important as an event now for hunters to have. Maybe even makes it top tier, the fact that you're going to have unnatural fogs occurring more often. Same with bats, right? I can see if bats are occurring more often, you're going to have more situations where hunters get hit by bats and they're going to get pushed into fighting vampires more often. And that creates more dangerous situations for hunters. They're going to take more damage in night fights against vampires, or other sort of traps where you combine, wolves and spies and things. So yeah, the trail is just going to become more dangerous. Even though you've got things like rats and saboteur, which are maybe not the strongest, the overall deck is stronger because you're amplifying the percentages of how the frequency of the really top events, the vampires if they're fighting ones, bats, unnatural fog, and Hoax. So Dracula's trail is just going to be stronger because of it. It's going to make it maybe harder for layering, just because we often use layers just to throw away encounters that we don't want in our hand. But now you're going to have a situation where you're going to have lots of strong stuff in your hand. So maybe Draculas won't be layering on every turn. They might be more strategic when they layer and when they don't. But if you're going to do a strategy where Dracula wants to go around in a little small circle on one part of the board and keep going back to those layered locations and tripling or quadrupling the encounters which are there, then the layers are going to be even stronger than before potentially, because you're going to have more vampires in there and the like. So maybe not as much variety in terms of the encounters. It's kind of nice if you have a layer, we got like 3 encounters in it, and maybe just throwing a Desecrated Soul in there just to cycle the encounters even more. Also, the other thing I just thought of with Desecrated Soil is the one thing that Desecrated Soil is good at as well is that the hunter has to reveal Heavenly Host to clear it, and that then does give Dracula a little bit of information about who has Heavenly Host, especially if it's earlier in the game, or if it's going to be very, very late into the game, and maybe one Heavenly Host has been used, but Dracula doesn't know where the other 2 are. He might be able to work that out, because otherwise the only way you know is either it gets played in combat or Consecrated Ground. But Consecrated Ground you don't discard the Heavenly Host. So yeah, it's maybe not the most important point for Desecrated Soil, but sometimes it can be useful to know if a hunter has Heavenly Host or not, or the hunter can then play games with Dracula. I've done it before where I've not revealed Heavenly Host on Desecrated Soil, because then immediately there's a combat with a vampire or with Dracula, and I'm able to use the Heavenly Host, and Dracula doesn't expect a Heavenly Host to appear because I didn't clear the Desecrated Soul with it. So it just depends on the situation. So yeah, it's a very interesting change. I didn't think that would be the sort of thing to prioritize in terms of changing the encounter deck. Again, it's not really something in our community that we've ever sort of really mentioned and gone, oh, wouldn't it be nice if the encounter deck was thinner? But I'm not saying it's a bad change. It's just not a change I expected per se. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Again, once we see the full encounter deck list and see if any other effects have been changed, we assume Bats and Unnatural Fog have the same effect. They got the same token, so I assume so. I assume these 4 will have the same effects. Maybe the Saboteur Roadblock mature, maybe because you got Roadblock as an event card, so maybe that Saboteur, maybe that's changed a little bit, but I don't know what you could have changed it to. And then the main thing is going to be the vampires. Does the new vampire act the way it does in 4th edition? I'd just be interested to know, again, if there's anybody from Avalon or Avalon Hill or Hasbro who were involved with this project and they want to explain why this was done, get in touch with me through the Nomad Discord server, and I'll be very happy to hear your thoughts on it. So yeah, feel free to leave comments down below of what you think about these changes. It'll have a lot of ramifications, as I said, for the event deck as well, right? It makes Forewarned more important, Escape Route even more important, Planned Ambush more important, even Heroic Leap more important to kill some of these vampires potentially. Stakes are going to be more important than ever, which means that will sort of shift the dynamic of what sort of weapons hunters hold and things. But maybe this is going to be the thing that, is the buff that Dracula needs at a high skill level. I'm not sure, but we'll have to see. But yeah, feel free to leave all your comments down below, and any time there's any news about 5th edition or whatever, I'll be on here doing a quick video reacting to it and my thoughts. And yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. I've rambled on long enough about encounters. See you in another video very soon. Bye bye.